Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike Tagliavere. You're listening to Right Side Up. We'll be flying solo today. Lots to talk about. Probably won't be able to cover it all. We only have an hour to do so, but let's dive in. First of all, I wanted to say we had a great weekend, a great week, beginning Thursday and ending Sunday at the Tunbridge Fair. I was helping man the booth at the Orange County Republicans booth. It was great turnout, great weather, and lots of positive reaction from people, positive interactions. People have been willing to come up and talk about what's going on, both locally in Vermont and nationally. But we really managed to keep it about what's going on in Vermont. But a big topic, very big topic, was the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And our thoughts and prayers go out to his family and all of his followers and friends. I did see a day or so later that his wife had put out a statement, and reactions to her statement actually spurred what I saw, and I haven't rechecked. It was north of 18,000 requests for new chapters for Turning Point USA. So the person who tried to silence Charlie Kirk with a bullet has not managed to silence him or Turning Point USA, which is good news. We can't be cowed by this kind of third world violence, and that's what it is. It's third world. We live in a civil society, and this cannot and should not be tolerated. So, but again, we had a great fair at Tunbridge. I think from all reports that I got, it was a record turnout. The weather was really good, which I'm sure helped. But there was really the upbeat atmosphere, really upbeat. A lot of people moving around, smiling, thumbs up, positive interactions. So I want to get into some stuff that's tied directly to the violence against Charlie Kirk and just violence in our society in general. I saw that, unfortunately, Burlington again made national news. I was looking, a family member referred me to an article that they had found on Fox News. Apparently there are some business owners that are not happy with what's going on, and they're actually asking for, and we've talked about this on Right Side Up numerous times, the broken windows policy. What they're basically requesting, citizens and business owners in Burlington are basically looking for more police presence and for law enforcement to actually make arrests and have our judicial system put these people through the system as they should be. If they are charged with a crime, they should get their trial and find out what the consequences of their actions should be. But we don't have that. Most people in the state of Vermont, whether you live in Burlington or outside of Burlington, you know that that's not the case. We have the revolving bail system. We have, the petty crime. And I'm not even sure if you can call it petty crime anymore because of inflation and the cost of everything, that everybody in Vermont knows that there are problems we need with respect to public safety that need to be addressed. So, and I think we will, in the coming months, we will start addressing this. It's not going to go away. Thankfully, a lot of people are engaged. They're paying more and more attention politically. They're trying to find out who their representatives are and what their records are, and that's a good thing. So I wanted to refer you to an article that I found dated September 15 on Vermont Daily Chronicle by Dave Sulia. And this is from his site, I believe, fyvt.com. According to the Rutland Herald, Rutland High School attendance officer Howard Wasserman wrote an apparent inflammatory post on Facebook about the assassination of conservative speaker Charlie Kirk. Superintendent Pam Reed told the paper she had received multiple complaints about the post, but could not comment further on personal matters. His post read, "Violence of any kind is not okay, but if you feel bad because a racist piece of, you fill in the blank, was gunned down, there's something seriously wrong with you. Meanwhile, there was another school shooting today, and nothing will be done because the racist pedophile party is running the show. So this is a paid school official who made this statement. That last line raises a blunt question for Rutland residents by saying the, quote, racist pedophile party is running the show. Did a district employee effectively label roughly half of Rutland City's voters and taxpayers, Republicans, as racist pedophiles? And it certainly sounds like it, okay? The article continues, and he does a very good analysis here. A captive clientele. Unlike private businesses, public schools don't operate on a, quote, take your money elsewhere, end quote, model. Rutland families are a captive clientele. They fund salaries and pensions through taxes, whether they agree with staff views or not. Parents and taxpayers who feel maligned by a public employee's rhetoric cannot withhold their contributions or choose another district. I'd like to see that change with school choice, but that's another segment, another show maybe. So another question arises. Should taxpayers be expected to keep funding an employee who openly disparages a large portion of the very community he serves? Let's see. Next, moves on here. District policy on safe schools. Rutland City's policy 7400 on harassment, hazing, and bullying requires the district to maintain a safe and supportive school environment and empowers it to impose serious discipline up to termination when conduct on or off campus substantially interferes with a student's ability to access education. Which raises yet another question. If conservative students now feel chilled from speaking up or fear being mocked if they form a Turning Point USA chapter, does that meet the district's own threshold of substantial interference? And I want to break from the article. One of the things that we're finding out, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm glad we're finding this out, is people are not being cowed. They're talking about this. The request for thousands, tens of thousands of new chapters of Turning Point USA means that the message has gotten out, and this violent act, third world violent act, in my opinion, has had the exact opposite effect. So there will be some good coming out of this because more and more people are learning who Charlie Kirk is. If they didn't know, they're seeing more and more of his videos on YouTube. So the message is going to be amplified. I really believe that. Okay, I want to get back to the article here. Rutland students have a history of pushing back on bullying, whether rallying against cyberbullying apps or running school-wide positivity campaigns. The district itself has partnered with outside groups on anti-bullying programs. Charlie Kirk founded Turning Point USA in 2012, the same year he graduated high school at 18. Over the next 13 years until his assassination, he built it into a movement with chapters on more than 3,500 high school and college campuses. TPUSA says its media team and ambassadors now reach over 65 million followers across platforms, while Kirk himself had 3.8 million YouTube subscribers. Given that reach, isn't it fair to assume that some Rutland high school students and even younger teens were familiar with or fans of his work? If so, what message do they take when an adult in their school publicly dismisses Kirk's life and labeled his supporters' families racist pedophiles? Doesn't it undercut the very anti-bullying lessons schools are trying to instill? And I think this is a valid point. This is why I wanted to cover this article. Is this killing, this savage killing, senseless killing of a man who only used a microphone to change hearts and minds, to have a debate, a peaceful debate. And he went to some of the most unfriendly places to do this and just set a microphone down and had talk back and forth with people. I'm very happy to see that people are not putting up with this, and they're not being cowed. They're not being quieted. They are still speaking out, and I hope that continues. First Amendment versus school function. As a public employee, Wasserman has First Amendment rights, but those rights aren't unlimited. Courts allow districts to weigh an employee's speech against the need to maintain an effective, trusted school environment. If community trust and parent cooperation are undermined, or if students' willingness to participate is chilled, the district has leeway to act, even for off-duty speech. So the question becomes, has his speech crossed that line from private opinion into public disruption? The controversy hasn't been limited to school employees. One Facebook comment celebrating that Kirk would never, quote, never spew his garbage views ever again, end quote, was liked by Rutland City Board of Aldermen member Kiana McClure. For taxpayers funding both schools and municipal government, that raises yet another question. How are conservative residents perceived by those elected to represent them? Very good question. Whether RCPS disciplines Wasserman or not, the fallout is already broader. In the span of 1 week, both a school employee and a city alderman signaled contempt for conservative residents. Roughly half of the city's population and half its voters, taxpayers have no choice but to keep funding the salaries of public officials who speak this way, and parents have no choice but to send their children into classrooms run by the same system. And we need our kids to be safe, ladies and gentlemen. We need our kids to feel like they can be in a learning environment. They can question without being ridiculed. Let's see here. For conservative students, the impact is sharper still. Some admired Kirk, some followed Turning Point USA online, and some even have considered starting a chapter at Rutland High. After this, would they feel safe doing so? Or would they assume, that adults in authority will view them as racist pedophiles before they've said a word? And I hope the students who are considering this, if there are any, will go forward with it. Schools teach anti-bullying every year. Students themselves have led campaigns against cyberbullying in Rutland. What lesson do we take when the adults who are supposed to model that standard seem to excuse or even celebrate contempt aimed at their peers' families? The unresolved question isn't whether Howard Wasserman or Kiana McClure are entitled to private political opinions. It's whether public officials in a city divided nearly down the middle can afford to write off half the people they serve and half the students they are supposed to support. So this is, just because this incident didn't happen, this assassination did not happen in Vermont, doesn't mean this doesn't have or couldn't have a chilling effect in Vermont. I don't think it will, because of the conversations I've had this past week, like I said, at the fair. There were a lot of people who were very upset. They were angered by the situation. They were also feeling that they were not going to be quiet about it. I personally am very happy to see how many requests there are for new Turning Point USA chapters. In watching, I didn't watch a lot of Charlie Kirk's views, but I was amazed at his ability to remember so much history. I was told he had a photographic memory, and that makes a lot of sense. But he was able to recall so many passages, not only from the Bible, but passages from history, incidents from history, to use as examples of why he does and says what he did. And he was able to, even if he wasn't able, the beauty of it was because he had such a large forum, he was able to change minds of people who were in the crowd, not just worry about changing the minds of people who he was directly debating. So we've come to the end of the first segment, ladies and gentlemen. We've got to pay some bills. We'll be right back. You're listening to Right Side Up.
Hey, this is Steve from Granite Rock. I'd like to thank Mike Tagliavia and Right Side Up for being part of Granite Grok and Grok Media LLC's podcast network. You can check out all our programs every night of the week at 8 p.m., except on Tuesdays when we do Granite State Live, which starts at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Please make sure to check out all our programming, including Grok Talk, Granite State Live, Justice for All, Right Side Up, Manch Talk, The New England Take, and our newest edition, The Elsa Kurt Show. You can also check out content from Shadowband, The Blue Collar Intellectual, The Generation Report, and The Vermont Podcast. And be sure to visit granitegrok.com for news and opinion you can't get anywhere else.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Right Side Up. My name is Mike Tagliavia. We've been talking about the very unfortunate assassination of Charlie Kirk, some of the violence that is actually happening, or threats, or intimidation, at least intimidation, that's been going on in Vermont just by social media posts. And it's happening in schools, which is really dangerous because we've talked about this, I think, only just last show or whatever. And I talk about this all the time. Our young people are the people who are going to be taking care of us in our elder years. They're the ones who are going to be in position of power in not too many years. And this is the reason why I talk about young people all the time and trying to guide them, protect them from some of the misleading information that they're getting. So, and I just want to remind people, one of the segments we did, or one of the shows we did, it was regarding a phrase that Rob Roper, who's an author I quote from a lot, people experiencing progressive policies. That's what we're experiencing right now. So I just wanted to remind you of that. And I want to get into another article. I just happened to see this. It was attached to a post by James Woods on X. And if you're on X and you haven't followed James Woods, I highly recommend it. The man really knows how to break down some of the stuff that's going on. And I love that he's an actor who wasn't intimidated to toe the line. So he's a real freedom-minded American. So you might want to check him out on X if you have the time. But he quoted and linked this article. It says it's from tabletmagazine.com. What Killed Charlie Kirk? And more importantly, how can we stop it? By Lyle Leibowitz. What can you say in the aftermath of a national tragedy like Charlie Kirk's assassination? In the 24 hours or so since Kirk was gunned down in Utah by a shooter who, as of this writing, is still at large, and now we know, ladies and gentlemen, that the young man who we believe was responsible for the murder of Charlie has been apprehended, apparently encouraged to turn himself in by his own father, who, from what I've read, is retired law enforcement. So that had to hurt. We've been treated to a torrent of predictable responses, outrage and hurt from those who knew and loved him, sadistic glee from many who didn't, and from the vast majority of Americans in between, some version of the following sentiment. And I did see that when we were at the fair this past week. Mostly it was disappointment and anger that this is what we've come to in this country. We can't allow this sort of thing to happen in America, and I agree with the author. Amen. But to stop the next shooter, we need to understand where this one came from. And for 24 hours or so, we've been offered nothing but heaps of twaddle on this singularly crucial question. To hear our politicians and pundits, left, right, and center, tell it, the shooting occurred in a politically charged climate committed by some coward who chose to end the debate with a bullet. Toss in some lip service to mental health and the obligatory lip pursing about gun violence, and you have the consensus vision of what went wrong. And it's a strangely comforting one at that, because it casts the shooter as a horror movie monster, terrifying but singular in its ghoulishness, the one meanie who emerged from the toxic swamp of bad, curable social phenomena. All you have to do then is find him, catch him, deter others from getting any crazy ideas, and our long national nightmare will be over. But the nightmare, sadly, is far greater than that. If we're being honest and level-headed, it's not too hard to understand that the tragedy was imminent. It didn't happen in a vacuum, and it was no freak aberration. Charlie Kirk was shot because great forces spent decades reshaping social norms, institutions, and creating cadres of Americans ready to do great violence to anyone they were led to believe was their enemy. And I just want to break from the article for a minute. Remember, Saul Alinsky, demonize your enemy. That's what this is. That's what this is. So this author, I think, is correct in a lot of what he's saying. This isn't hyperbole. In a grim coincidence, just a few hours before Kirk's assassination, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression released a survey of 68,000 students in 257 universities nationwide. 1 in 3 said it was acceptable to use violence in response to offensive speech. This is dragging us into third world. Like all complex and still unfurling stories, the account of how we got here is intricate and contains multitudes, but we must look at this straight in the face and attack the problems head on. Let's start fittingly enough with births. Over the last few decades, American birth rates have plummeted precipitously and are now projected to reach 1.6 births per woman in the next 3 decades, well beneath the 2.1 births per woman replacement rate. This should come as no surprise because Americans, it turns out, have also stopped having sex. In 1990, according to the Institute for Family Studies, 55% of Americans reported having sex on a regular basis. The number now stands at 37%, and it's dropping even faster for younger Americans. In 2022, the Kinsey Institute found that 1 in 4 members of Gen Z had yet to have sex with a real live human partner. How did we become a sexless society failing to reproduce? The answer is simple: by design. For 30 years at least, we've all been treated to a carefully orchestrated campaign against embodiment, or the idea that biological realities matter and that they have something profound to do with who we are. Remember, this is for 30 years. I'm going to read that again. For 30 years at least, we've been all treated to a carefully orchestrated campaign against embodiment, or the idea that biological realities matter and that they have something profound to do with who we are. It began with abortion, which we were told was a human rights issue and besides was to be kept safe, legal, and rare. Then before you knew it, we had entertainers like Michelle Wolf celebrating abortion as an all-out good on Comedy Central. Then came the tide of transgenderism, which began with the silencing of a Brown University professor whose research proved that kids were declaring themselves trans because of peer pressure. Here we go. I want to refer you back. I got a break from the article. Refer you back to the article we did in the first segment. Are our students going to be cowed by school employees paid for by the taxpayer just to be accepted? We can't have that. Schools need to be teaching kids how to think, not what to think. All right, let me get back to here. Then came the tide of transgenderism, which began with the silencing of a Brown University professor whose research proved that kids were declaring themselves trans because of peer pressure, emanating in large part from the culture and social media platforms. Before too long, we were told that though every cell in the human body has its own sex-specific chromosomes, gender is a social construct that could be changed at will, and that biological males should now be allowed to compete in women's sports or to be incarcerated in women's prisons. And I got to break one more time from the article because I want to refer you back to, and I know we talked about this on the show, can't remember how long ago, but during the recent session that's just ended in June, there was the Raise the Age bill. It was dubbed Raise the Age bill, which could have got, if it gotten into effect, it was delayed 1 or 2 years, I cannot remember, but it would have made 19-year-olds eligible to be charged as minors, and it would have overwhelmed the system. But the point here is, when there was debate, the Democrats and progressives kept reminding us, kept insisting to us that we had to follow the brain science. And the brain science that the Democrats and the progressives were touting was that 25 and 26-year-olds, 25-year-old women, 26-year-old men, that's when their brains are finally fully developed, that their brains don't develop to those ages, and that we cannot charge them as adults until then. Well, if that's the case, can we please follow the brain science? Can we please follow the brain science for the sake of our kids and our country? But the kids first. Follow the brain science. They are not capable of making these decisions yet because their brains are not fully developed. And we see scientists telling us, psychologists and psychiatrists telling us, that most early onset rapid onset gender dysphoria winds up curing itself as kids, young people, work their way through puberty. So we know the brain science, but we're not following it in certain instances. I need to get back to the article here. Let's see. Before too long, we were told that though every cell in the body has its own sex-specific chromosomes, gender is a social construct that could be changed at will, and that biological males should now be allowed to compete in women's sports or choose to be incarcerated in women's prisons. And we know that that's happened. And the women in women's prisons who've committed crimes are now being victimized by the men who say they're women. Okay. Those who objected to this lunacy were silenced. And we saw that when there was a presentation in the People's House in Montpelier that was shut down, given the heckler's veto over trans ideology in school. It's happened in Vermont, ladies and gentlemen. It has happened. Let's see. Those who objected to this lunacy were silenced, or if they were unfortunate enough to be British, arrested. Entire generations of children grew up being taught that it was right and good to deny obvious biological reality. Entire swaths of doctors were trained to say that cutting off the breast of a healthy young child was called, quote, gender-affirming care, end quote, and was entirely virtuous. This collective psychosis didn't just happen. It was orchestrated by a tightly knit coalition that included Democratic politicians who pushed transgender messaging and policies, including former Vice President Kamala Harris, who cheered on federally funded sex change operations for prisoners, as well as media outlets who framed the issue as a civil rights crusade, foundations that funneled millions into activists, NGOs, and corporations that rushed to enforce the new abnormal. And this collective psychosis left us with no shortage of people like Robin Westman, for example, a transgender youth who eventually picked up a rifle and slaughtered 2 children in a Catholic school in Minneapolis, or Audrey Hale, a biological female transitioning to male who massacred 3 children in a Christian school in Nashville. That broken, disfigured people will eventually do something desperate should come as no surprise. I got to repeat that. That broken, disfigured people will eventually do something desperate should come as no surprise. The list of iniquities sadly goes on and on. In the name of criminal justice reform, for example, Hordes of violent criminals were let loose. We've seen this in Vermont. People experiencing progressive policies. Hordes of violent criminals being put through a revolving door. In Burlington alone, we have someone who had over 1,000, I think it was over 1,600 interactions with police, including arrests. Over 1,000. When is enough enough? All right, I'm seeing that we're coming to the end of our segment here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to continue this article into the next segment because it's really good. It really needs to be talked about. You're listening to Right Side Up.
Not everyone can get up every day and look for ways to piss people off. But here at GraniteRock.com, we do that almost every day. I can't tell you how many times someone's lost their SHIT and threatened to end us. But we're still here, pissing people off. It's almost like we enjoy it. And we've been doing it since 2006. That's almost 2 decades of news, politics, and opinion, and now podcasts, and we're just getting started. We believe in principles before parties and politicians. We defend free markets and individual liberty, and if that makes you mad, it makes us smile. We're like Grandma after she stopped caring what other people thought. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Rock, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Right Side Up. My name is Mike Taglavia. Before we get back into the article, I wanted to just remind my listeners, our listeners, rightsideUpradio@gmail.com if you'd like to drop us a line. If you, for some reason, can't catch us on the radio or you are not in the radio listening area, rightsideUpradio@gmail, Right Side Up Show. Let's see, go to WNTK.com. You find the podcast button. You click on it, scroll down, you'll find Right Side Up. You'll find any number of our shows. You can find us also on Podbean. You can find us on GraniteRock.com. You can find us on 802 Scoop YouTube. You can find us on 802 Scoop Facebook. So hopefully you enjoy the show. Hopefully you'll share it with a friend so we can spread the word. We cannot be cowed, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you consider yourself a moderate Republican, a conservative, doesn't matter. Whether you consider yourself an independent, it really doesn't matter. Even if you call yourself a moderate Democrat, that's great. It doesn't matter. Do you feel like you can speak freely without someone threatening you with speech? We have the First Amendment. We need to be able to enjoy the First Amendment and not worry about our kids being intimidated or failed in school. That's another form of intimidation because someone disagrees with us. And the reason I say that is because I spoke with a woman just this past Sunday at the fair, who mentioned just that. She would like to get more involved, but she's afraid for her child because of her actions. This should not be in this wonderful Green Mountain state of Vermont, USA. It just should not be. If someone has a disagreement with someone an adult says, then the adult in the room should have a conversation with the adult who made the statement. Leave the kids away from out of this. The kids do not deserve that, and they shouldn't have to be worried about it. So I want to get back into this article because I think it's very good. It addresses something that's been going on for a really long time. And this refers to a lot of things that we've seen, that I've seen. Most of my listeners have seen happen, or they know a friend or a family member who it's happened to. Okay? Getting back to this article from tabletmag.com, the list of iniquities sadly goes on and on. In the name of, quote, criminal justice reform, for example, hordes of violent criminals were let loose, backed up by progressive attorneys general and activist judges and local legislators who robbed law enforcement officials of any means of meting out justice. Bail, we were told, was modern-day Jim Crow. Prison was slavery in other forms. Policing was racist. And when savages like DeCarlos Brown Jr., with 14 prior violent convictions to his record, were set loose, it was only a matter of time before they produced a knife and slaughtered Irina Zarutska, a young Ukrainian refugee, on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina. When brave men like Daniel Penny, who successfully neutralized a deranged violent criminal threatening to harm fellow commuters on the New York subway, intervened, they were dragged through the coals in court and on TV. When a police officer detained a repeated violent felon high on fentanyl and methamphetamines, leading to his death, American cities burned for days, with Democratic politicians taking a knee and corporations paying vast fortunes to a group, Black Lives Matter, I will say Black Lives Matter Incorporated, that vowed to dismantle the nuclear family and failed to report what it was doing with its vast funds. Put bluntly, then, we have angry, violent, and hopeless people because many of our societal institutions worked assiduously to produce them since at least 2008. All of this should be entirely coherent to any serious student of politics. What we have here is a group of people assembling an entirely coherent construction for the purpose of holding and maintaining power. And to keep this charade going, even when it got patently ridiculous, arguing, say, that there were 57 genders or that houses of worship had to be closed during COVID, but liquor store and nail salons were welcome to do business as usual. Or that race riot that torched up your town was a mostly peaceful protest. The left applied its most trusted weapon, that of the permission structure. When every academic and every late-night talk show host and every newspaper editorial told you that Trump was Hitler, good luck wearing your MAGA hat to the neighborhood picnic and not facing severe consequences. Remember, I got a break from the article a minute. I remember years ago when Charlie Kirk was much younger. I believe he was in a lunch meeting, sitting in some sort of a cafe or restaurant with, I believe it was Candace Owens. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And they were peacefully and quietly just having lunch, but they were recognized. And they were swarmed and intimidated while doing nothing more than sitting and peacefully having a lunchtime conversation with each other. This is what this article is talking about. No progressive member of Congress or union boss or assistant professor of anthropology anywhere ever told anyone to go ahead and shoot Charlie Kirk or Donald Trump or anyone else. But the whole point is that they didn't have to say the quiet part out loud. All they had to do is construct a society thick with brainwashed young men and women who hate themselves, hate the bodies they were born into, hate their nation and their faith and their families, and take directions from a top-down political infrastructure that instructs them what to think and when. A structure that tells them what to think and when. We have to reverse this. This is the part we have to reverse. It's precisely the sort of environment that easily breeds shooters. That's the bad news. But here's the good. There's much we can and must do to make sure there's not going to be another shooter. The left's power vertical is mighty, but it does not get to define what the law means. And our Constitution and system of government alike, hallelujah, give us a box full of sharp tools designed precisely to eliminate this sort of overwhelming threat to our freedoms. Examples abound. Academic freedom to choose one obvious corner of our collective rot doesn't mean you get to indoctrinate children and teach all manners of violent sanity while insisting on public funding. Every state in the union at every level of schooling has local government approved curricula precisely to make sure some zealot doesn't hijack the hearts and minds of the young. The problem, I'm going to break from this. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is we've lost real, true local control. Anybody who's voted on a school budget at town meeting in Vermont will tell you that, because it comes up at town meeting. It comes up all the time. Back to the article here. We can and should deny any academic institution engaged in bigoted madness of even a dime of public funds, and vigorously punish any failure to protect students from the repercussions of failing to succumb to groupthink. Groupthink is what has caused this. The Trump administration, thankfully, is already doing just that. Just ask Columbia University. Individual judges in Colorado or California have precisely zero legal authority to stop the executive branch from exercising its lawful powers under the Constitution. This principle has been affirmed by the Supreme Court, and yet we see activist jurists again and again inventing laws that simply don't exist and usurping power they simply don't have. They need to be stopped, and when appropriate, immediately disbarred and forbidden, from holding office ever again. Americans who openly call for the overthrow of the lawfully constituted government in the United States are engaging in sedition. They belong in prison. People who have open ties to designated terrorist groups are a grave threat to our national security and can and must be removed from America post haste. Doctors who perform gruesome medical experiments on children under the guise of, quote, gender-affirming care, end quote, or believing in fairies or any other feverish ideology should be jailed and prosecuted for child abuse. The administrators of their health care systems who let these horrors happen should be arrested and prosecuted as well. So-called progressive activists who take money from Neville Roy Singham, a self-proclaimed communist with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, who runs his operation from Beijing, should be arrested and prosecuted for being a part of a seditious conspiracy to disrupt the domestic peace of the United States in the interest of a hostile foreign nation. None of these measures are extreme and are perfectly legal and entirely precedented. They're all absolutely necessary. Holding quiet candlelight vigils or town-owned meetings on Zoom won't stop the next shooter. To do that, we need to crush the titanic structure erected by the left and free our republic from its ruinous designs. We need to free our republic from its ruinous designs. And that's not a project for just one candidate or one political party. It's a civilizational reclaiming project. And it calls on all of us to first understand what happened to America and then work together to change it. Then, and only then, will we give Charlie Kirk justice and America a real turning point. So I'm curious. Now, this again was written by Lyle Leibovitz. He's an editor-at-large for Tablet Magazine and the host of its weekly podcast, Rootless. Now, I wonder how many people in the listening audience agree with that. What he wrote in the article here. There's a lot to digest in there. He's talking about decades and decades of things that, like Rob Roper has very succinctly put it, people experiencing progressive policies. And that's what we're doing. We're doing that here in Vermont. We're doing it all over the country, experiencing these progressive policies. And I think they've come to a head. We've seen now that I believe there are a lot of people who are desperate. They see that they're losing control. They're losing the narrative. People are wising up that their taxes are getting to a point where no matter where you live, not just Vermont, but Vermont is getting very, very expensive. It's in the top, among the top in the nation. We're seeing our school scores go down precipitously while our costs for education going up. We see, like was quoted in this article, public safety is again and again and again in the forefront of the news, and we're making news, national news, worldwide news, for how out of control our public safety system is. We see cities like Burlington dragging the whole state down. They're taking the whole state down with them. They're putting a strain on our entire public safety system. One of the points in the article that I just read is very relevant to the state of Vermont. Only a few years ago, I believe it was Sarah George, and I believe it was only a few years ago, she wasn't ready to or didn't want to charge a man who violently, I think with either a meat cleaver or a hatchet, murdered his wife. And the governor needed to step in and have the Attorney General's office look at the case, and the Attorney General's office, thankfully, secured a conviction. But this is what I'm talking about. This is not isolated to another state. This assassination happened in Utah, but we can directly see the effects of bad policy, progressive policies that we're experiencing. So I just wanted to, again, I can't, we're almost to the end of our show, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to remind you, keep yourself informed. I always ask you of that. I always ask you, know who in your local government, whether it be your select board, who they are, what they vote for. Know who your state legislator and your state senator is. Know what they're voting for, because they possibly could be somebody who brought this, and we can reverse it. We can reverse it. So just remember, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, stay informed, listen to Right Side Up.